I believe it was the rock god Lemmy from Motorhead who once said, "It's time to play the game." Yes, sir, it is. Let's take a quick look at Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. There are times when the world is rearranging itself, and at times like that, the right words can change the world. Humanity does not ask us to be happy, it merely asks us to be brilliant on its behalf. They have a word for people our age. They call us children and they treat us like mice. But never in my entire childhood did I feel like a child. I felt like a person all along, the same person that I am today. Perhaps it's impossible to wear an identity without becoming what you pretend to be. But I've lived too long with pain. I wouldn't know who I am without it. I think it's impossible to really understand somebody, what they want, what they believe, and not love them the way that they love themselves. In the moment when I truly understand my enemy, understand him well enough to defeat him, then in that very moment, I also love him. And then in that very moment when I love them, I destroy them. I am your enemy, the first one you've ever had who was smarter than you. There is no teacher but the enemy. No one but the enemy will tell you what the enemy is going to do. No one but the enemy will ever teach you how to destroy and conquer. Only the enemy shows you where you are weak, and only the enemy tells you where he is strong. And the rules of the game are what you can do to him and what you can stop him from doing to you. I am your enemy from now on, and from now on, I am your teacher. Since when do you have to tell the enemy? When he is won. Hey, what's up, bookworms and buggers? Mike back today to talk a little Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, originally released in 1985, but actually took shape in the form of a short story in 1977 in Analog Science Fiction and Fact magazine, reworked into a novel and released in 1985. I think at this point, everyone has at least heard of Ender's Game if they have not read it. Look, it's so popular, guys, that even the United States Marine Corps lists this not as required reading, but as recommended reading because it helps to show teamwork and strategy in a military setting. So this book has quite a legacy on its own, even before you factor in that it won the Nebula and the Hugo Award in 1986 for Best Novel. It sold over 7 million copies. It's had 5 sequels, 3 spin-off series, novellas, comics, video games, even a feature film adaptation. So why did it take me so long to read this? Guys, I read this for the first time in 2017. Now, let me tell you, I'll take you on a little trip down memory lane here. I used to be much, much different. Now I'm like, hey, there's 2 great things. Yes, give me all of that. Back when I was a younger lad, I used to be like, oh, someone's saying that something is better than my favorite book of all time? Well, then I've got to think of all these reasons why I hate it. What I'm talking about, of course, is if you guys are a constant watcher of this channel, you know how I feel about Dune. If you are a new viewer to the channel, Dune is my favorite book of all time. And it seemed like Dune fans and Ender Games fans for years had always been banging heads over which one was better. And at the time, like I said, I was Team Dune, so I was like, no, Ender's Game, that's a stupid book for children, right? That's kind of how I felt about it. But in 2017, I started to realize, you know what? I've changed a lot more since I was a teenager, and I love all of the good things now. So I put this one off for the longest time, but read it for the first time then in 2017. How did I feel about it? Well, guys, we are going to talk about it now, but let's begin, like usual, by getting into what is the book about? In order to develop a secure defense against a hostile alien race's next attack, government agencies breed child geniuses and train them as soldiers. A brilliant young boy, Andrew Ender Wiggin, lives with his kind but distant parents, his sadistic brother Peter, and the person he loves more than anyone else, his sister Valentine. Peter and Valentine were candidates for the soldier training program but did not make the cut. Young Ender is the Wiggin drafted to the orbiting battle school for rigorous military training. Ender's skills make him a leader in school and respected in the battle room, where children play at mock battles in zero gravity. Yet growing up in an artificial community of young soldiers, Ender suffers greatly from isolation, rivalry from his peers, pressure from adult teachers, and an unsettling fear of the alien invaders. But Ender is not the only result of the genetic experiments. The war with the buggers has been raging for 100 years, and the quest for the perfect general has been underway for almost as long. Ender's two older siblings are every bit as unusual as he is, but in very different ways. Between the three of them lie the abilities to remake the world. That is, if the world survives. Guys, 1985, Ender's Game. Before we get into what makes it good or bad, guys, I'm going to say something up front to kind of maybe save some of the time. Look, I love this book to death. It is my second favorite science fiction novel of all time, behind only Dune. So if you're looking for someone to just tell you why this book sucks, like I know a lot of BookTube has really found fun to do the last few years, you're not going to find it here. So you might want to just go ahead and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to skip this one, Mike. I'll just catch you next one. Save yourself the 20 minutes. But if you're still on board and you want to take this journey with me and find out why I think that this is such a great book, hey, stick around, because we're going to get into it now with what makes it good or bad. Now, the good, obviously, is the strong and very well-developed characters. There is something to like with just about every character here. There's something to hate with just about every character here. There are very few characters in this story that you're going to feel indifferent to, and that is the sign that an author knows how to write characters very well. Now, look, there was a red flag for me. One of the things, besides with the stupid thing that I mentioned earlier, that kept me from reading this for years, where I don't know how I feel about kid protagonists. I mean, really young kid protagonists, because it kind of gets, it's be like, all right, it's just something that's just probably not going to click for me, because, you know, obviously I read this when I was, nearing 40 years old, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to relate to something like this. But I think what he is able to do with this story is that kids are not like, kids you and I are used to, right? This isn't a world where there is no childhood. You're basically straight to adulthood, because, we got a war to win. So I think the fact that he was able to take his characters and treat them like adults was something that was very different to me. At first I was like, okay, this guy isn't Stephen King. He can't write kids well, right? And then I was like, oh, but he's not writing them as kids. He's writing them as kids who are obviously getting some psychological damage because they're thrust into these situations much earlier than they're emotionally ready for it. But he does it in great ways. I mean, you're going to, Ender's very complex. You're going to empathize with him quite a bit. He's more than just, a child genius, a prodigy, all these kind of things. He's never given a chance to have a childhood. And like I said, I think the psychological damage is very front and center with Ender in this, as obviously the book is taking place from his point of view. So I think that you're going to be surprised, and that it is not written. This isn't a story that's written for children. It is a very adult story that has children in the main themes that make more sense, I think. I think very much in that kind of what I said about Red Rising. It's not a YA book. It is an adult book that has young protagonists in it. Same, I think, with this one here. But the siblings aren't just throwaways either. That's a great thing about it. Peter and Valentine, they aren't there just to prop up Peter. Same with his classmates at school. These aren't secondary characters that are just there to prop up our protagonists. They have very important roles in this, especially Peter and Valentine. But I think that what Valentine does in this story is the story can get kind of cold sometimes. It is very brutal, very grim, very bleak. And I think that she gives this story the compassion that it needs. And you see this is why Ender cares so much for her, because he can be cold and calculating quite a bit, and she basically, can talk him off the ledge several times when he's about to go one way or the other. She is actually able to bring him back, and ground him a little bit. And that's something he very much needs in a child who's, got just been completely just taken advantage of his whole life, So I think that makes her probably the second most important character in this story, clearly. But she loves Ender unconditionally, and that's something he needs, I think, a little more than anything. Now, older brother Peter is like basically the complete opposite here. You think if Ender's kind of in the middle here, and you got Valentine over here, Peter is somewhere over here. He's very much a sociopath, and he's very good at manipulation. And he's not just I would say he's a mustache twirling antagonist kind of to this story, but he plays a major role on the stuff that is happening on Earth. There is a subplot in this book that, full disclosure, guys, I haven't read any of the sequels. I'll get into that a little bit later. But I think it's something that's going to play in huge later in the series. I do not know, but I will find out eventually. But yeah, it's something that I feel like Orson Scott Card was very, very ahead of the curve in talking about how politics are going to work in the age of the internet. You know, I feel like he very, very much foresaw this, and it's very hard. Like I said, when he wrote this, it was very much speculative fiction, and look at it now, it's kind of like, you know, it kind of hasn't gotten quite to the point of what Locke does in this book, but it's one of those things where you look at it and you be like, I can see some of these things coming to truth, which are very much like I've talked about with Fahrenheit 451, with 1984, themes that if you want to find them, I think that you can. Sometimes they can be prophetic, sometimes you can just say, okay, you're trying too hard, but this one I seem like it's very ahead of the curve, very much like a Ray Bradbury, but incredible growth over all the pages for all three of those characters right there. And it's one of those you think that, okay, well, Ender's going to battle school, we're not going to hear about these siblings the rest of the story. No, they are very much very important characters. Then you got Colonel Graff, and I think he's the father figure character for Ender that you know his real dad never really gave him. You know, I think it's stated that his parents are, you know, they're kind, but they're very distant. You know, they never really emotionally attach to Ender. So this kind of gives him a kind of the thing. Now look. He's totally taking advantage of him, but he does care about what happens to Ender. He does grow to really, really care for the boy, and I love it. He has ulterior motives for sure, but he does genuinely care for Ender, and I think that's something he very much needed. You know, we talk about some of the classmates here at the school. I can see where stuff like this very much influenced something like a Harry Potter or something like a Red Rising, and that you got all of these little side characters at this battle school that are actually more than just red shirts, you know, just there to be throwaways and things like that. But Bean's a character I know gets expanded more in later books, but you got a lot. You got Dink, Petra, Bonzo, Bernard, Stilson, all the kids at the battle school, they're all really great. They're really well defined. Like I said, you're going to love some of them, you're going to hate some of them, and you're going to hate some of them, but it's done so well. Again, I think that's when you know an author's writing really good characters, when you're feeling an emotional reaction one way or the other, and he definitely does that. None of these characters feel like throwaways to me, and I think that that's very important for a book like this, to not just make it be like, okay, you've got all these classmates here, they're just to prop up the antagonist. Because you find that problem with a lot of stories like this. There's a lot of books out there now who love this battle school format here. And I don't know if Orson Scott Card created this, but going back and reading it, I was like, all of those tropes seem really, really stale now. And when I read this, it seemed super fresh. And I started thinking, okay, this is the oldest book I've read that's really used that. So clearly not. It's clearly not probably the first time that's been used in that way, but it definitely seems like it was inspirational. If you kind of add the years, okay, a lot of these modern sci-fi and fantasy authors probably read this book when they were younger, or were greatly influenced by it. I mean, it's a very influential book, obviously, so I can see that quite a bit. But I love the themes in this book. There's so many of them. There's about youth, there's about manipulation, isolation, competition, friendship, identity, just about anything that you can really think of. I love that he doesn't be scared to come out and say competition brings out the best in all of us, and there can only be one winner. I love that. I love that because I've said so many times that competition brings out the best in us. If everything's just kind of, okay, we're all on a level playing field, you know, how is anyone going to differentiate themselves? How is anyone going to stand out? Why is anyone going to strive to get better if we're all just kind of graded on the same level? So I love that he really does. He does make that very forefront at the thing here. But you know, I've been a sucker for a coming of age story. I brought this up a lot. This is not your traditional coming of age story because there is no transition from childhood to adult. You know, it is just straight. Hey, you know what? I don't care that you're 6, and yes, and you're 6 when this book starts, and it does go over some years. Yeah, it's time to put on your big boy pants and go be an adult and hopefully save, humanity. So, no pressure there. But in the identity theme, I think it's not as much of the usual question of like, who am I kind of thing. It's more of a like, where do I draw the line? You know, how far is going too far? How long or how far do I go before I'm just becoming like Peter, which is a killer, you know? So I think that's the kind of moral questions that this book brings up. And it just makes so many of the themes just resonate so well. But again, like I said, so many books use this battle school, capture the flag kind of thing, and it just doesn't work the same way. And he just finds a way to make it feel absolutely fresh. And like I said, reading this, you know, at this age, after I've read some of those other things first, I'd read Hunger Games, I'd read Red Rising, things like that. And, you know, there's several that use this format. I didn't read them, but my wife talking about Divergent, she's like, geez, I've never seen this story before, you know. So I think it's one of those things where it's a very, very popular storytelling format. And I don't think that he created it. But like I said, going back and reading, and I'm like, okay, but he's one of the best to ever do it here. Now, there are some bad things. It's very, very, very nitpicky for me because I think this is a spectacular book. I feel like there's no fat on it whatsoever. I know I complain on this channel all the time about YA and the perfect Gary Stu, Mary Sue characters who, everybody loves them for no reason whatsoever. They always win no matter what. They never have to work for anything. And I've seen a lot of people say they didn't like this book because they thought Ender was a Mary Sue, Gary Stu, whatever phrase you want to use, perfect in every way, Mary Poppins. I disagree with it, but I can see why people think that. I think if you go back and you read the book, he faces struggles and the odds are stacked against him all the time. But, it does seem like every time there is some big simulation, it's kind of like Cena wins, LOL. I get that. I can see that for sure. I'm pretty sure at one point where he's just kind of talking about this kid racking up these victories, he's very explicit about what happens each time. And then by the end, he's just like, and then Ender won. I think even he kind of did. So I can see that bothering some people. But guys, like I said, I hate that trope so much. And I never once feel like anyone in this book loves him for no reason. Obviously, once he starts being a leader, people follow him. And that's the way that it should be. He leads by example. But he has lots of enemies at Battle School. Lots of people don't like him, and he has a lot to overcome in this story. So by very definition, I don't think that he's a Gary Stu, but I do think that some people will have a hard time with how this kid always manages to find a way to win. Again, I don't think it's a problem, but it's something that does come up quite a lot in negative reviews. But for me, it's very much not a bad thing. Guys, that's really all I got. Look, this is a really, really short book. So it's one of those things where I'm like, I can't really think of anything I really want to rail on it except that it ends, And you would think, hey, well, why haven't you read the sequels? Well, that's just one of those things, guys, where I've heard so much mixed things about the sequels, and it's just kind of scared me off on it because I love this book so much. I was afraid of reading something that felt, because I've had people use the words of the sequels are so bad it taints the original, and that scares me. That's something I don't want to do. I know a lot of people say that about Dune too, and I don't feel that way about Dune, but it's one of those kind of things with Dune. I think is obviously what I've heard about Ender's Game is it's nothing like the first book. If you love Dune and then you read the sequels, you're going to look back and be like, wow, it was not what I was expecting at all. So I think I kind of expect the same with Ender's Game. But I just know that there's people who love this series and they don't like Xenocide. They like Speaker of the Dead, things like that. They're like, I don't like this, and this, but I love this book. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Obviously, I don't let those opinions make up my mind for me, but they are things that have always kind of deterred me from doing it. But what about this book, guys? Let's talk about why you should read it. This is one of the very pillars of science fiction. I don't think you'll find a single modern fantasy author out there right now, probably in their mid 30s to early 40s, that weren't influenced by this book at some point in their life. I think that it's just one of those things. I think it's very much up there with Dune as far as influencing goes. It's 20 years later than Dune, but at this point, we're talking is 30 something years old here. So it's one of those things where you're just kind of looking at it and you say, this is one of the greats, right? Because I've always heard so much about it. And I think we owe it to ourselves to go back and read the classics. That's why I've said, you know what? I want to read Asimov. I want to read, Arthur C. Clarke. I did that this year. I haven't done Asimov yet, but hey, I watched Foundation. Now I really want to read Foundation. But again, I wouldn't call this book YA, like I said. But I do think that young readers should be encouraged to read it. About junior high age, I think, would be perfect for this, up through high school age easily. I think that this is going to identify with them so much that they're going to find so many things that they love about it. And it's one of those things that teaches about teamwork, teaches about competition, overcoming incredible odds, compassion, forgiveness, and more. All kinds of things. Knowing when to show mercy, knowing when not to show mercy, knowing when to end things. All of these important lessons, I think. Fun little tip, guys. Is this I said that this is not required reading, but recommended reading in U.S. military. I finished business school a couple of years ago, and this and Art of War were very much recommended reading in business school as well. So I think there's a lot of lessons that I think you can take away from this. But again, I think that this is a book that kids will enjoy, and adults have many things that they will take very, very seriously. Look at me. I read it for the first time when I was, 38, 39, and it teaches that children have the same complex emotions and relationships that adults do. I think that's great. But it impacted a generation. I think it's going to continue to do so for many, many years, probably well after we are gone. This is definitely going to be like a Dune in that people are talking about this book well past the time the author leaves us. So that's kind of where I stand with it, and I think that you guys should pick it up immediately. It won't take you but a day or two because it's a really quick read. I read this thing in about 2 sittings. Yeah, I enjoyed it so much, and I think that you will too. But I do have some final thoughts here before we move on, guys. I wish I had read this when I was younger. Why do I say that? Because I talk about how Dune influenced my life so much, about how Dune had so many teachings and lessons, I thought, in that story that I applied to my everyday life. It changed the way I looked at everything, the way I approached, the way I went about things. I think that if I had read this when I was that age, very much would have been the same kind of thing for me. I feel like a lot of people that have argued these two books, I can see why. It almost seems like whichever one you read first is probably going to be the one that you apply those things to. But I definitely think while Dune, this doesn't come close to knocking Dune off as my favorite sci-fi book of all time, but I do think it resides in the same neighborhood. It is that good. I have no problems with it being mentioned in the same breath with Dune. It is a very, very fantastic book. I think anyone's going to enjoy. But outside of leadership and competition and friendship and perseverance, I think that this thing teaches about how miscommunication can doom anyone. That's a big one here. I think that's the buggers, they couldn't communicate with us, and they might have actually had peaceful intentions, but they couldn't communicate, and it ultimately led to their doom. And when it comes to like allegory and stuff like that, you can always try to spin it any way that you want. That's one of the kind of things that I took away from it. That might be way off. I don't know, but that's the way I looked at it, that we need to communicate with one another. Just talk to one another. You think this was written during the Cold War in the U.S. So it's one of those things we look at, why don't we just talk to each other instead of pointing weapons at each other? But these things, guys, make this my second favorite science fiction book of all time. Probably a top 10 book for me all time. I can't wait to reread it. When I was just doing that introduction, just going through the book, flipping through and finding some quotes that I had highlighted when I read it before, I was very much encouraged to want to read this again. So I would love to do so. So I hope if you guys haven't checked it out yet, you will. Like I said, I know there's a lot of negativity going on BookTube about this book right now, but I hope you guys will shut that out and just read the book for what it is. And I think you'll find more than one thing that you like. So guys, have you read Ender's Game? What did you think? Drop in the comments and let me know, and I will talk to you there.